Sweat dripped down the brows of the young recruits as the relentless San Diego sun scorched the naval base courtyard. Amid cruel laughter and malicious whispers, they watched the hunched figure scrubbing the floor with slow, deliberate motions. The old janitor, with his disheveled grey hair and worn-out uniform, seemed the perfect target for their daily frustrations. No one there could imagine that this simple man carried secrets capable of shaking the very foundations of everything they thought they knew about courage. With every sweep of the broom, an epic story lay buried beneath decades of silence. Laughter echoed through the corridor when the janitor stumbled slightly, spilling dirty water across the freshly cleaned floor. "There goes Grandpa again!" shouted one of the younger soldiers, provoking an explosion of laughter among his peers. The older man simply lowered his head, cleaned the mess without a word of protest, as though long accustomed to this daily humiliation. His eyes, however, shone with an intensity none of them could fully decipher. Behind that frail appearance pulsed something that would make any soldier tremble if they discovered the truth. The bullying had become a macabre form of entertainment for the young recruits, who saw in the janitor a convenient outlet for their own insecurities. Accidental shoves, equipment forgotten in his path, sarcastic remarks about his age, everything was part of the daily show that turned one man into the target of cruel amusement. The janitor never fought back, never complained, only carried on with his work with a silent dignity that irritated his tormentors even more. They did not realize that every insult, every laugh, was forging an emotional time bomb soon to explode in an unexpected way. The storm was coming, and no one was prepared for what was about to unfold. That Tuesday morning, as the janitor organized his cleaning supplies in the dark storage room, a distant echo of military boots began reverberating through the base's corridors. The rhythmic, precise sound announced the arrival of someone important, someone whose steps carried the weight of absolute authority. The old man slightly raised his head, his sharpened senses catching nuances others completely ignored. Something in the air had shifted. A different energy hung over the naval base, and he knew his carefully constructed world of invisibility was about to collapse. Destiny was knocking at the door, and there was no longer any escaping the past that had haunted him for decades. The boots stopped before the base's main entrance, and the silence that followed was deafening. Commander Jake Morrison emerged from the military vehicle with the magnetic presence of a man who had led impossible missions in hostile territories, his blue eyes scanning every detail of the environment with the precision of a born predator. The SEAL insignia on his chest gleamed beneath the California sun, a symbol of elite brotherhood few men in the world had the right to wear. Around him, the young recruits lined up at attention, their cruel jokes instantly forgotten in the face of the absolute authority that had just stepped onto their territory. The air grew heavy with palpable tension, as though the very atmosphere recognized the arrival of a true warrior. Morrison walked the corridors with calculated steps, inspecting every corner of the facility with the meticulous gaze of someone who knew how to spot flaws where others saw perfection. His seasoned hands touched surfaces, checked equipment, tested the soldiers' discipline with direct questions that cut through any attempt at pretense. The commander's reputation preceded him like that of a living legend, a veteran of classified operations that had altered the course of modern history, a man who had faced death so many times that it had become just another familiar adversary. Everyone on the base knew that being under his scrutiny was both an honor and a trial by fire that few could endure unscarred. Then Morrison heard the laughter echoing from the East Corridor, a sound utterly out of place in the atmosphere of respect and discipline he expected to find. His command instincts sharpened instantly, like a radar detecting something out of place in hostile territory. He followed the sound with the caution of a man who had learned that seemingly insignificant details often revealed much greater problems hidden beneath the surface. What he found made him stop abruptly. A group of recruits surrounding a hunched figure, their voices dripping with youthful cruelty he knew all too well. The scene stirred dark memories of injustices he had witnessed on distant battlefields. The commander observed in silence for a few seconds, analyzing the group's dynamic with the keen insight of someone who could read people like tactical maps. The janitor at the center of the humiliation did not react to the taunts, but something in his posture, the way he held his shoulders, the discreet way his eyes swept the room, ignited a familiar instinct in Morrison's chest. It was the body language of someone who had faced far worse than ill-mannered teenagers, a stillness that only came from experiences that marked a man forever. When Morrison finally chose to intervene, his words cut through the air like sharpened blades, scattering the recruits like frightened rats, but leaving a disturbing question echoing in his mind. Who was this silent man who cleaned the corridors of his base? Morrison's intervention scattered the recruits like smoke in the wind, leaving only the commander and the janitor alone in the silent corridor. The older man carried on with his work as if nothing had happened, but Morrison noticed something that made him furrow his brow, the unconscious military precision in the janitor's movements as he reorganized his equipment. Each tool was placed with an efficiency that could only come from years of rigorous training, an economy of motion that betrayed muscles still remembering disciplines far deadlier than cleaning floors. The commander approached slowly, his veteran instincts whispering that he was facing something far more complex than a simple base employee. The way the janitor maintained peripheral awareness of everything around him, even while pretending to be absorbed in his tasks, was a reflex no civilian would ever develop naturally. "Sorry about the mess, Commander," the janitor muttered in a hoarse voice, but Morrison caught something familiar in the tone, the controlled cadence of someone who had learned to remain calm under extreme pressure. When their eyes met for a fraction of a second, the commander felt a chill run down his spine. There was depth in that gaze, layers of experience that seemed to echo his own memories of combat. The man quickly looked away, but not before Morrison caught a glimpse of something that disturbed him deeply. It was the look of a soldier recognizing another soldier, even through decades of disguise and denial. The mask of simplicity was beginning to slip, revealing fragments of a truth neither of them was ready to confront. Morrison decided to test his growing suspicions with an apparently innocent question about the base's layout, observing how the janitor answered with detailed knowledge of evacuation routes and strategic points no civilian employee should know. The reply came automatically, too precise, revealing a familiarity with military terminology the man then tried to cover with a nervous stammer. Morrison felt his pulse quicken. He was clearly standing before someone with significant military training, someone who knew security protocols taught only to elite personnel. Every word exchanged between them carried heavy subtext, a delicate dance between revelation and concealment that made the air vibrate with unspoken tension. Morrison knew he had stumbled onto something big, but he still couldn't fully piece together the puzzle unfolding before his eyes. When the janitor finally walked away with his equipment, Morrison remained standing in the empty corridor, his mind processing the inconsistencies with the analytical precision that had made him legendary among the SEALs. The fleeting, upright posture when he thought no one was watching, the way his eyes automatically identified points of entry and exit, the intimate knowledge of the base that transcended his official duties, all pointed to one disturbing conclusion. The man everyone dismissed as an insignificant janitor carried secrets that could completely rewrite the history Morrison thought he knew about his own military career. As he walked toward his temporary office, a single question hammered in his head with growing intensity. What kind of soldier would hide behind the identity of a janitor? And what could have happened to force such a radical transformation? The early dawn brought with it a deafening alarm that tore through the base's silence like a war siren, jolting everyone out of their beds in absolute panic. Morrison sprinted through the corridors following emergency protocols, but stopped abruptly when he saw the janitor already strategically positioned near the main checkpoint, as if he knew exactly where his presence would be most needed. While recruits stumbled over one another in desperate confusion, the older man moved with a supernatural calm that clashed completely with the chaos consuming the installation. Morrison watched, both fascinated and unsettled, as the janitor discreetly organized the flow of people with subtle gestures that seemed far too instinctive to be casual. The alarm ceased, revealed to be nothing more than a security drill, but the janitor's behavior during those crucial moments had burned an indelible image into the commander's mind. Morrison approached slowly, feigning an inspection of the emergency procedures, but his eyes remained fixed on the man now pretending to be busy checking fire extinguishers with suspiciously technical knowledge. The way he quickly tested each piece of safety equipment, the precise manner in which he evaluated escape routes, the tactical awareness he demonstrated in choosing his position, all confirmed Morrison's growing suspicion that he was dealing with someone far more dangerous than he appeared. The puzzle was becoming more complex with every observation, and the commander felt he was on the verge of uncovering something that would change everything forever. The janitor's true nature began to reveal itself on Thursday, when a near-fatal incident tested everyone's reflexes on the base in a way no one expected. A rookie recruit was mishandling a piece of heavy equipment when the cable snapped, sending a 200-pound metal component hurtling straight toward the skull of another unsuspecting soldier. Morrison watched in horror, knowing there wasn't enough time to shout a warning or physically intervene. The death seemed inevitable in that frozen moment of absolute terror. But then, like a ghost emerging from the shadows, the janitor materialized out of nowhere, his reflexes unleashing a sequence of movements that completely defied his appearance of frail old age. The man dove with surgical precision, shoving the soldier out of harm's way, while dodging the falling metal with an agility that made Morrison question everything he thought he knew about human speed. The silence that followed was more deafening than any explosion Morrison had ever witnessed on a battlefield, as everyone present slowly processed what they had just seen. The janitor helped the shaken soldier to his feet with paternal gentleness, but Morrison caught the fleeting moment when the man's muscles remained tense and alert, as if still scanning for potential threats in the environment around him. The transformation had been so swift that some began to doubt what they had actually witnessed, but the commander had watched elite fighters long enough to recognize movements that came only from decades of intense training and life-or-death situations. When the janitor finally relaxed and slipped back into his fragile persona, Morrison felt a chill crawl down his spine. He was clearly standing before someone who had endured experiences few humans on the planet could imagine, and the disguise was beginning to unravel irreversibly. Morrison's obsession with uncovering the janitor's truth turned into a silent investigation that consumed every free moment of his stay at the base. He began discreetly reviewing personnel files, searching for inconsistencies in the man's documentation, but discovered the records were surprisingly scarce for someone who had worked in a military installation for so many years. The basic information was all there: name, address, work references, but something about the file felt far too clean, too polished, as if it had been carefully sanitized by someone with access to resources far beyond ordinary bureaucracy. Morrison felt his investigative instincts roar to life, recognizing the telltale signs of a professionally constructed identity, the kind of work only specialized government agencies could execute with such perfection. During his nightly rounds, Morrison started observing the janitor from a distance, noticing behavioral patterns that confirmed his most disturbing suspicions about the man's true nature. The supposed custodian knew patrol schedules with military precision, avoided security cameras with intimate knowledge of their blind spots, and moved through the base with a familiarity that could only come from years of studying every inch of the installation for purposes far beyond his official responsibilities. Even more unsettling was the way other veteran staff members interacted with him, a strange mix of respect and distance that suggested some of them knew more about his identity than they were willing to admit publicly. Morrison began to realize he was dealing with something far greater than a simple personal mystery. There was a conspiracy of silence protecting this man, and he needed to uncover why before it was too late. The revelation came completely unexpectedly during what seemed like an ordinary morning, when Morrison caught the janitor adjusting a t-shirt that had shifted during heavy work. For a fraction of a second, the collar slipped open, revealing part of a tattoo on his neck that made the commander's blood run cold instantly. It bore the distinctive symbols of a military unit so classified that Morrison had to blink several times to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. The tattoo showed the Delta Force emblem, combined with geographic coordinates he recognized immediately, the exact coordinates of an ultra-secret mission in Afghanistan that had changed the course of the war on terror 15 years ago. Morrison felt the world spin around him as the truth struck like lightning. That man, humiliated daily by recruits, was not just another veteran, but a living legend he had searched for decades without ever managing to identify. Commander Morrison recoiled instinctively, his mind processing the magnitude of what he had just discovered as repressed memories began to bombard his consciousness like grenade fragments exploding in his head. He remembered perfectly that impossible mission that had saved hundreds of American lives. A lone soldier had infiltrated a heavily defended terrorist compound, neutralized dozens of enemies, and extracted crucial intelligence that dismantled an international network of planned attacks. Military authorities had buried every detail of the operation so deeply that not even classified files contained the hero's real name, referring to him only by the code name Ghost, a soldier who had vanished completely from official records after the mission as if he had never existed. Morrison had always assumed the man had died in combat or been eliminated to protect state secrets, never imagining he was living a life of forced invisibility right under his nose, enduring daily humiliations as penance for sacrifices no one would ever know he had made for the nation that now ignored him completely. The memories of what truly happened on that fateful night in Afghanistan began to crystallize in Morrison's mind like a film in slow motion, each detail gaining painful clarity as he finally connected the dots that had tormented him for 15 years. The soldier known only as Ghost had volunteered for a suicide mission no other operative was willing to accept, single-handedly infiltrating a terrorist compound that housed not only dozens of seasoned fighters, but also American hostages whose lives depended on an impossible extraction. The operation was supposed to last 4 hours, but stretched into 3 hellish days when the original plan collapsed entirely, forcing the soldier to improvise a survival that tested every limit of what a human being could endure physically and mentally. Morrison remembered the cut-off radio transmissions, the long silences that made everyone fear the worst, and the final explosion that lit up the desert sky like a second sunrise when the entire compound went up. When the rescue teams finally reached the site, they found a scene that would haunt everyone present forever. Terrorist bodies scattered strategically throughout the compound, evidence of a one-man war fought with surgical precision that defied everything they had learned about urban combat. At the center of it all, half conscious and drenched in blood not entirely his own, was the soldier who had not only saved the American hostages, but had also recovered intelligence that prevented terrorist attacks that could have killed thousands of innocent civilians. The operation was so successful and simultaneously so brutal that the military high command decided it could never be officially acknowledged. The soldier was declared killed in action in public records, his true identity erased from all files, and a new life was constructed for him, far from the spotlight that could compromise future classified missions. The national hero was transformed into a bureaucratic ghost, forced to live an anonymous existence as a reward for sacrifices that transcended any medal the government could publicly bestow. Morrison felt his legs tremble as he approached the janitor at the end of that day, each step weighed down by a truth that would change them both forever. The older man was organizing his equipment in the storage room when he sensed the commander's presence, and for a moment their eyes locked with an intensity that made the air vibrate with decades of unspoken secrets. "I know who you are," Morrison murmured with a choked voice, watching how the janitor's body stiffened almost imperceptibly, every muscle preparing for a confrontation that had been inevitable since the very first day. The silence that followed was charged with almost palpable tension. Two warriors, recognizing one another through the layers of time and disguise that separated them from the brutal truth, both carried in their scarred hearts. "Ghost," Morrison said with almost religious reverence, watching how the forbidden name made the older man close his eyes with a pain that transcended any physical wound he might have suffered in battle. Tears began streaming down the janitor's aged face, decades of forced isolation and daily humiliation finally finding release through the recognition of someone who understood the true weight of his silent sacrifices. "I thought everyone had forgotten," he whispered with a broken voice, revealing the devastating vulnerability of a man who had given everything for his country, only to be erased from history as if he had never existed. Morrison felt his chest tighten with a mixture of rage and admiration that threatened to overwhelm him completely. Before him stood not just a forgotten hero, but the living embodiment of everything most noble and most tragic in the silent service of war. The days that followed the revelation completely transformed the atmosphere of the base, as if an ancient spell had finally been broken by a truth too powerful to remain buried. Morrison could not publicly reveal the janitor's real identity due to the classified operations still protected by layers of secrecy, but his respectful demeanor and the discreet whispers among senior officers created a subtle shift even the youngest recruits could sense. The man who had once been the target of cruel jokes now walked the corridors with a silent dignity that seemed to radiate from within, as if the simple act of being seen and acknowledged for who he truly was had restored an essential part of his soul that had been lost for decades. Morrison watched from a distance, discreetly protecting the veteran as he processed the profound lesson about rash judgments and the invisible price some men pay for the greater good of humanity. On the morning of his departure, Morrison found a small note discreetly left on his desk, coordinates handwritten in the same precise script that had once documented mission reports which changed the course of modern history. When he visited the indicated location, he found an improvised memorial hidden among the trees at the back of the base, where small stones marked the names of comrades who never returned home, men whose sacrifices would remain forever unknown, except to the one who had survived to honor their memories in silence. Morrison finally understood that the janitor had chosen that life not out of defeat or despair, but as a form of sacred penance, serving humbly in the very institution he had once protected with blood, while guarding secrets that could shatter entire families if ever revealed. As he drove away from the base for the last time, the commander carried with him a lesson that would forever change his perspective on true heroism. Sometimes, the greatest warriors are those who choose to fight invisible battles, protecting a world that will never know their names, finding honor not in public glory, but in the quiet dignity of a duty fulfilled in complete solitude.